Greetings, EricWhitmoyer.com community. This is David, and I'm here with Eric Whitmoyer. And today we are talking about Eric's latest blog post, which is on 100% responsibility. You can find that blog post on EricWhitmoyer.com. You can also go to our store. We're going to be talking about the book, Success with Goals, as well as the companion guide that goes along with it throughout the day today. But definitely go in, check out the blog, and we're going to be talking about some of the key points as we go throughout our session today. Eric, welcome.
Good afternoon, David. Good to see you again.
Likewise. So as we were kind of prepping for what we wanted to cover in this blog, I think this is an important concept. I'm actually really excited about this because this is something that you and I have talked a lot about over the years, and specifically, we both have come from a sales background, and so this is a pretty key concept, I think, for both of us. So the first question is just pretty straightforward. What does it mean to take 100% responsibility of your life?
All right. So really important topic for us to really kind of discuss and consider, because one of the challenges with personal development, personal growth in general, is the concept of 100% responsibility. And basically what it means is, what it says is you take 100% responsibility for everything in your life. It doesn't get any more direct or obvious than that. It's just you literally have to take 100% responsibility for your life, because in doing so, it allows you the opportunity to really kind of own the circumstances and situations that happen to you. And then when you own it, now you have the strength and the capability basically to make the appropriate changes you want to make for your life.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. It's good insight. And it's interesting, and I think where you and I first started talking about this is you got certified as a Jack Canfield trainer, which is obviously a pretty big deal. And you actually gave me a copy of his book, The Success Principles. And this is the first principle that he talks about. And I know that you've trained on this and coached on this extensively since you've gotten your Jack Canfield certification. And I'm curious, can you give us any insight on maybe why Mr. Canfield put this as the first success principle?
Yeah, that is a great question. So the key takeaway here is that it was in fact a purposeful idea to have the number one principle be 100% responsibility. And it kind of goes back to that point that I just made. The challenge is unless you're willing to accept 100% responsibility for everything in your life, you lack the control or the ability to be able to do to do anything to change your life. So for instance, if you can excuse away something that's a mistake in your life, something that's wrong with the way you want it to be, if you can excuse it away by blaming somebody else for your circumstances, then you don't have to own the responsibility. And if you don't have to own the responsibility, well, you don't have to change it. It's not your responsibility to change it. So for instance, if you and I had a business together and you made some poor decisions with the finances or something like that, and we ended up having to shut down the business, I could go on for the rest of my life blaming David because he made some poor choices with our finances, and consequently now that's why we lost our business. And I could blame you for the rest of my life. That's not taking 100% responsibility. And so an example of taking 100% responsibility in that situation would be if I would have recognized that we have challenges and gaps in our communication, that we're maybe not being as financially sound with our planning and the way we need to be. And consequently, then I would, step in and we would create systems or processes to ensure that doesn't happen. By not doing that, I can the rest of my life, I can blame you for our setback and our failure. And that I don't grow from that. I don't get better from that. My life doesn't get better. I don't learn anything from it. So you can't learn anything from something if you don't take 100% responsibility. As long as you can blame somebody else for your setbacks, your failures, your shortcomings, anything that you're frustrated with, as long as you can blame somebody else for those circumstances, you don't have to own it. If you don't have to own it, you're not going to grow from it, right? You just won't. There's not any reason to. But when you own it and it's your responsibility, you take on that and you throw that on your shoulders and say, I got to own this. For some reason, it just kind of changes the way your perspective is. And you're like, no, I have to find a way to push through this. And consequently, I'm going to find a way to overcome the circumstances. So that's the first and the reason out of the 67 principles, the reason that's number one is until I'm willing to accept that I have my setbacks and my challenges as an individual, my opportunities as an individual, until I'm willing to own that they're all mine and they're all my responsibility, I won't change any of them. So that's why that was the first one and why it's so important to really address that one first and foremost.
Okay, awesome. And that's great insight. I appreciate you sharing that. Obviously, we talk a lot about your book. we think Success with Goals is pretty good. And I did want to point out that we also do have a link to the success principles on our site that'll take you right there if that's something you're interested in. Highly recommended. And Eric is certified in the success principles and methodology. And so occasionally you'll see some of that pop up, and it's a great read. So definitely check that out too. So, okay, Eric, great insight. As you know, I like to be the skeptic sometimes because I know we've got some skeptical people that might be watching this or maybe resistant to this idea.
Oh, that's why I keep you around.
That's right. Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who's maybe, watching this and they're thinking 100% responsibility? Really? I mean, what about the stuff that happens to me? And maybe they take your example and say, well, you chose to start that business, Eric, so you knew that was going to happen to you. What happened to me, I had no control over. And I say that because there are things that do happen to people that we didn't invite into our life, right? Or maybe you can't directly tie a decision to a car accident or things like that, But for the people watching this, who maybe have that resistance to this idea or concept, what would you say to those folks about the things that maybe we don't think we had a hand in?
Fair enough. You know what, here's how I position that. I think there's two ways to look at it. The first one I'll probably continue to get pushback on. The second one I think will be a little bit more understanding. But the first one is that if you think about it, in every scenario, there was no one decision or one action that led to the setback, the opportunity, the challenge. It was a series of decisions. It was an accumulation of decisions over an extended period of time, no less. If you look back at any bad setback or challenge or big opportunity you had to deal with, you didn't whatever wall you ran into, you weren't going 1,000 miles an hour in the right direction the whole time and then just ran into this wall. You were making conscious decisions along the way, well, conscious or subconscious, right? But you were making decisions along the way where you could have redirected yourself off a certain course and gone away from that path, and consequently, you wouldn't have ended up in that ultimate situation that you're in. For instance, if I'm rowing down a river and the rapids start picking up, and all of a sudden I find myself at the mouth of Niagara and I'm about to go over the falls, when the water started picking up, I probably should have got a little bit smarter, got closer to the edge of the river, or maybe even considered getting out and scouting out before I let myself go to the end of the falls, right? So we have the ability to recognize that there are little things that come to us. Sometimes they're not epiphanies, but they're like little things that set us off. They're like that sixth instinct that we talk about or whatever, right? Something that kind of goes off in you and says, hey, I don't feel right about this. So something doesn't smell right. Something smells funny. We have verbiage in our language that actually speaks to this concept of having that additional sensory, right? And it's like, this doesn't feel right. And so we see it coming. We just choose to avoid it oftentimes because there's something else that's obscuring it. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's a certain type of relationship, or maybe it's something we're really passionate about, and so consequently we kind of avoid dealing with it. So the first part is, one, more often than not, we had a lot more say in the circumstance than we want to own. Now, to your point, there are certain circumstances that are above that. Let's say, for instance, like you kind of alluded to, a car accident, right? Somebody hits you. Were you running late? If you were running late, were you not paying attention to how fast you were driving or slow you were driving? Or were you not looking? Were you not being as observant of the traffic around you? And could you have avoided that accident? I was a younger man. I was riding with a young lady, and she was driving, and I remember very vividly. I mean, we got into a car accident. Somebody turned left in front of us, and we T-boned them. And I was in the passenger seat and I watched it all develop. I saw it coming. I'm like, how did you not see that accident coming? Because I saw it. I was all braced and ready for it when it happened. So anyway, it's kind of a long example, but the point is that we have pieces in it. We just don't always. It takes a lot of reflection. You have to go back and step back and say, okay, where am I in the mistake? And then it allows you to analyze it and say, ooh, wow, I did have an opportunity to redirect here. I did have an opportunity to correct this path and get back on track. Even when they are unique situations, sometimes, like now you go, let's go really extreme, natural consequences, earthquake, tsunami, right? All these kind of things. Again, you still made decisions to be there, right, at that time. Maybe that was a good time, maybe it was a bad time, whatever. Like for instance, I'm not going to be in the Midwest during hurricane season, or not hurricane season, but tornado season, right? So anyway, you're consciously making decisions that lead to that. Now, the flip side to that, and this is the part I think other people are going to be able to embrace and understand, when you look at 100% responsibility, one of the things that's we're talking about, how much did you have involved in it? Let's just say it's a circumstance, like let's say really, really bad situation. Let's say it's a rape, right? I'm not even going to get into could you have chosen whether or not you were there at that point in time. It's not even worth considering. But let's look at the fact that if you allow that to determine who you are, if you let that to define, let that circumstance, whatever life circumstance you're talking about, if you allow that to change your life in any way, in a negative sense, then you're choosing to do that. And consequently, you're not taking 100% responsibility how you respond to the circumstance. It's terrible. It's unbelievably terrible, and nobody would ever want to be in that situation. You would never want anybody you love to be in that situation. However, when it happens, how you respond to that circumstance decides everything, right? Because if you choose to be a victim for the rest of your life, and you hold on to that negativity and everything like that, you're always going to struggle with that for the rest of your life, and you'll never get out of it. But if you choose to recognize that you're not a victim, and that you have to be able to kind of change the circumstances and recognize that you can own it and move forward from it, then that creates some opportunity for you.
All right. So if I understand you correctly, Eric, I think what I heard there was when you really reflect and you peel back all of these decisions that we make, you're going to see that somewhere along the lines, you could have taken a greater extent of responsibility and control for your life and changed the outcome. And I think the other thing that I heard there was even if you feel, and the example you gave is definitely, an extreme, but there's going to be people who watch this or, kind of run into this concept in their life that have had those horrible experiences. And I think it's important to recognize that we still can be in control in those horrible circumstances because we can ultimately control our response to the event, right?
Right.
And I think that's insightful for everybody, and maybe people who live in the past or live in, in maybe the trauma of that moment over and over, is choosing to respond differently.
Absolutely. And I think that's the real big piece there, is that when it comes down to it, how you respond to it defines how you're going to live your life after that point. And, if you climb up and become a victim and never find your strength again, you'll be a victim the rest of your life. That'll always haunt you, and you've got to get it out. That's why a lot of people spend a lot of money on therapy sessions and things like that to go back and retrace the circumstances and relive that. Well, that's the thing about dealing with bad circumstances like that, is you have to live through it. You have to process it and move on. I mean, if you talk to any psychiatrist, they'll tell you, you got to process that and move on. That's the only way you can live the rest of your life. As long as you hold it and you keep it deep down inside you and you don't allow it out, then, the best thing to do, they'll tell you when you have problems like that, PTSD and things like that, guys coming back from the military, they tell you, talk about your problems, get it out there and talk about it, because then it allows you to process it. Now it's real, it's out there. As long as you hold it in, it's always going to be an anchor for you the rest of your life.
Sure. Okay. Well, Great insight. Final question, Eric, is I think it's always good to, try to bring this concept to life by personalizing it a little bit. So do you have maybe an example from your own life where you've applied this concept of 100% responsibility?
Yeah, I've got probably more than I care to admit. I've got a bunch where I didn't, and I can go back now and I can look at what I did, and I have a handful that I obviously did.
Sure.
Actually, I get a really good, I'll try and keep it brief. I've got two stories. One that I'll share where I took 100% responsibility and it paid off big time. And I've got an example where I didn't, and I can go back and I can retrace my steps and show how it would have paid out differently. I'll start with the bad circumstance, and I'll use a sports situation. I was in high school. I was a really a pretty good athlete, and I had an opportunity to do better, and I hurt myself, and I never told anybody about it. So I hurt my shoulder, and I never told anybody that I hurt my shoulder, and so consequently, this injury kept me from excelling at my best sport, which was baseball. And so although I played well, I didn't play up to the par that I thought I should have been able to. And when it came time at the end of my high school years to potentially go play college baseball or something like that, the best options that I got, and partially because that I had a hang up and I knew I didn't have a great year, and so I didn't play out as well as I would like. The best option I had was to get a partial ride at a private university. And that, I didn't have the money to go to a local university, let alone a private university. So I had a big chip on my shoulder, and I was frustrated with myself. And for years, I blamed this injury but the injury was my fault. I wasn't doing the things that I should have been doing when I was doing them. I shouldn't have been in the situation that I was in. And consequently, it wasn't terrible things. It's just dumb things you do when you're a kid. And that circumstance created this injury, and it extended, and it potentially cost me like a full ride to college, and so I had to figure out another way to go, which led to a whole nother chain of circumstances. So, but I go back now and I recognize the decisions I made led to that. Now, another example of where I took 100% responsibility. I had a situation early 2000s. I was in my business career, and I was launching a singular dealer in Washington, and the market was struggling because the network wasn't quite up to par yet, and they were still developing it, and we were launching it kind of early for the network, and it was a transition that no carrier had done at that point. And we really struggled because we would activate people, and as we get them activated, often what would happen is they'd come back and return because the service didn't work where they needed it to. We weren't quite ready when we launched, but they wanted to get it out there, and we weren't positioning it correctly. We weren't owning the fact that initially, right out of the gate, we weren't positioning the product and the service the way we needed to increase our sales and get the kind of sales results that we wanted to. And so I was frustrated because I wasn't getting the results I was hoping for. So as I kind of sat through it, I had somebody challenge me a little bit and say, hey, you know what, I think you guys can do better, and this is why I believe you could do better. And so I kind of took that and I processed it. I'm like, I can do better. Let me retrench this, and let me think about how I can do it better. And so as I thought, I'm like, nobody else is going to fix this, and it is what it is. So let me think about how I can do it. And that's when I came up with the idea, we're going to reposition this. And we recognized, we would tell people in our sales process, we realized this may not work exactly where you want it to all the time. No wireless technology is going to be perfect. However, what we can do is that we have this really aggressive offer, and it's going to be way more cost effective than any other service you've used before. So although it might not be ideal, it's like a third of what you're paying somewhere else, or something to that effect. And that way that we positioned it, it was very upfront, and it was honest with our service and what we could provide, and it kind of touted what our strengths were, which was the value play. It swayed customers and got them engaged, and they're like, okay, well, you know what, I appreciate that. I appreciate your honesty. And so even there was times where we wouldn't sell somebody because I really need the coverage to work here, or whatever the case may be, they would say, we respect you, and so even though we're not going to buy from you today, we're going to refer more people to you. Within about 4 months of making that transition, my division went from the struggling division to the number one division of the company at that time, and ultimately led to my promotion, and I moved to LA and took over an even bigger region. So but it was all, I could have made the excuse, oh, it's the networks, it's this problem, it's that problem. And in reality, I owned it, and I challenged my team and my leadership team to own it, my sales team to own it. And because of that, we were able to kind of reposition ourselves and get people bought in, and consequently it led to a phenomenal result for us.
Awesome. Two great stories. And I feel like I've got to ask this based on your, how you respond to things that you can't control. Did your sales increase while the network was still pretty bad?
Yes, absolutely.
It wasn't like you changed your mentality and all of a sudden the coverage got significantly better, right?
Exactly.
And yet you were able to produce a better result that led to future success. So.
And what we did is we stopped trying to position ourselves directly against the competitor, and we owned, hey, it's not going to be up to par to this carrier or this carrier. Yep. But you're going to pay a lot less, and we're better positioned because we have these services they're going to provide you. And so it may not be perfect, but we're still growing, and it's going to get better. And as it gets better, you're going to benefit. Plus, you're going to have the lower rate to pay. And that's how we sold it. And because we were honest and we positioned it that way, people bought it.
Great. Okay,
Yep.
Awesome. Well, great insight as always, and just excited to talk about this concept. As you mentioned earlier, go to EricWhitmoyer.com. We've got the blog post on there. You can read through it and get some more insight into this principle. And as always, Eric, we appreciate your time and expertise and insight. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.